Welcome to the Red Beard Embodiment Podcast. I am your host, Alex Greene, and I'm on a mission to bring the power of embodiment to people all around the world. In this podcast, we explore how embodiment practices, trauma healing, and knowledge about the human nervous system can help us find our ground, discover new sources of meaning, and create connection in an ever-changing world. The deepest change is embodied change. All right. Well, I am really excited to sit down today with Emma Sartwell. And Emma is a friend and colleague. And Emma is today in Rappahannock County, Virginia, which is outside of Washington, D.C. And I'm in Boulder, Colorado, as always. And Emma has a big background. She's like myself, and in our practice, she's a somatic experiencing person. That's one of our early points of contact. But more than that, Emma did a Master's of Divinity here in Boulder at Naropa University, and has a background studying interfaith and Buddhist chaplaincy. And I don't have that exact background, but I have the background as studying Buddhism through the Zen tradition and ordaining as a priest. And so Emma have found, and I have found a bit points in common around our, Buddhist studies and religious studies, and then the work that we do in the world through somatic work and other things. So that's going to be part of our conversation here today. Anyway, with that brief introduction, Emma, thanks so much for taking time today.
Thanks for having me, Alex. I always love chatting with you.
Yeah, well, most recently it was in Boulder, but now you're on the other side of the country. But soon enough, I'm sure we'll be in the same room again. Yeah, and I should mention too that Emma is the founder and owner of a very cool practice called Somatic Spiritual Counseling, headquartered here in Boulder, but with practitioners around the country and serving folks around the world. Some overlap too with the work we do at Red Beard Somatic Therapy. So I feel a kinship with Emma and her partner Chris and the work that they do. So we've got that point in common as well.
Yeah, we have a lot of areas of overlap.
We do. Well, and you have a dog named Oliver, and we have a cat named Oliver. So hey, that's another one.
Like an alternate.
Totally. And what don't we think we're the same Enneagram number?
Oh, probably.
Or likely, or maybe. Yeah. Well,
be a 3.
Yeah, I don't actually know my number, but
a lot of entrepreneurs have the same number.
Okay. All right. It takes a certain personality type. Yeah. Very cool. Well, the way I almost always organize these conversations is kind of like origin stories, background, and the overarching theme of this podcast is embodiment work. But what I tell most guests is that there's almost no topic that I think doesn't fall under my definition of embodiment. It's sort of like a catch-all for almost anything relating to the human experience. And we know we have the connection around nervous system awareness, and that's part of our shared language, and some shared language around Buddhism, and so we've got those points of contact. But I would love to just sort of rewind to your formative years and hear a little bit about what led you in the path of doing religious studies, chaplaincy studies, and therapeutic work.
Great. Yeah, where to begin? Well, one way to begin this journey is that I grew up Jewish, mostly Reform.
Mm-hmm.
And as a child, it did provide that sense of family and community, like songs and language. But then as I got older and started asking different questions, more, when you're in adolescence and you start asking those existential, why am I here? What are we doing?
Mm-hmm.
What's the point of this? How do I work with my own mind and my own emotions that are going crazy every second? And I found that I didn't have a container to deal with those inquiries. The religion I grew up in was helpful in some ways, but it wasn't touching those questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in New York. I was at NYU for my undergrad, and I felt similarly about academia. Academia is fulfilling some of my needs and some of my intellectual and social needs, but it's not helping me work with being a human being, particularly embodiment. So at around age 20, I feel like I really hit a wall with those questions, and I started seeking. And I started learning about energy work and shamanism and meditation and acupuncture and healing. Just really seeking, like what is out there? What can help me?
Can I ask? Can I already interject with a question? My question is based because there's, and I didn't know this chronology for your story, and it's already tied. Like for me, it was 1920. It was academia. You know, so I'm resonating. But so the question that's coming up is, with this initial study into shamanism, energy work, what I'm so curious, what were some of the early hooks? Like, what sparked that? What did you have some, what doors opened that made you interested in that specifically, if you remember?
Yeah, that's a good question. It was such an interesting period of my life where so much was changing in my mind and so many doors were opening, and I was like, oh, there's so much more here than I realized.
Got it.
And some of the things I remember were particularly, so I was at a really cool smaller school within NYU called Gallatin.
Okay.
And it's a design your own major program, and they have classes for credit. I got credit for studying Reiki and credit for studying shamanic practices. And so I took this Reiki class, and I remember I started having dreams about food, dreams about digging up dandelions and eating them, ripping up beets,
Wow.
And,
Yeah.
And it was the first time that I really felt, I think before that I was more standard American diet, food is fuel. I need some cheese to get through the next few hours. And then I started realizing wow, I actually have all these impulses and intuitions around what my body needs if I listen just a little bit deeper.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
I would eat those foods and I would feel a shift. And it's oh, I can work with this. I can feed myself, I can heal myself. And I had some experiences like that were less physical and more emotional as well. Sort of realizing, starting to unpack, oh, this is why I keep doing that pattern over and over. I'm starting to see more of the map. Okay. And that felt so enlivening. Sure, I imagine you experience this as well, when you realize, oh, I'm connecting the dots.
Totally.
And even if I haven't fixed the problem yet.
Yeah, insight into the situation. Yeah.
It gives you so much more freedom. Did it spark any particular early memories for you?
Well, what I'm remembering, so I was a freshman when I was in, and I think I've even mentioned the story of the podcast, so I'm not going to go too deep into it. But when I was a freshman, I was at this small liberal arts school in Western Massachusetts, and it was super academically oriented. And up until that time, that was my entire orientation, was academic achievement, and really interested in science, and really interested in math, and this sort of and a pretty this intellectual idea that all phenomenon, all of life, can be explained through a scientific and a mathematical paradigm. And to a certain extent, I still have interest in those, and I think that there's some truth in that, and there's definitely some not truth in that is what. And so the big encounter for myself was that that by putting all of my eggs in that worldview basket, I had excluded a huge amount of things. I was the co-founder of the Atheist Club in my high school, and I was pretty committed to a particular worldview. And I don't remember all the cracks in it. It had to do with some of my philosophy classes at school. It had to do with experimenting with psychedelics. But there were a number of things that sort of led me to conclude. But more than those things, it was intrapersonal, kind of like what you were sharing. It was just like, wait a minute, like there's just like cracks showing up in my own personality and way of being that I don't have any framework for looking at. So that was me, and so I just knew that, and so I had almost like this kind of complete shift where I thought to myself, wow, I've really it's been foolish for me to discount that there's other ways of knowing, that there's other sources of wisdom, that there's other ways of parsing our experience and reality. And so what I reached for the closest thing at hand, which was that my dad had been in Buddhism my entire life, very seriously, living in Hawaii. And so I in a phone call with him, I was like, hey, my whole worldview is shattering. What the heck is, you and I, we've talked a ton about science, but I've never asked you any single question about Buddhism in my entire life, but that's like your main thing. What's all that about? Is that what I'm looking for? And he had a really an answer that I like looking back on it now, which is that, his answer was something along the lines of, I don't no idea to know if that's what you're looking for, but what I do know is the only way to know is it like, I can't say yes or no. The only way you would know is if you tried it for a targeted period of time to find out if that. And so what that led to was a summer after my freshman year of college, when I went to Hawaii and I just did full-time practice for that. And luckily, I think I was lucky. It was like, okay, good. That was it was answering some of those doubts and questions. So that was kind of me. That led me in a very different path. So anyway, thanks for asking.
Reminds me of, I had a conversation with my dad when I was asking all those questions, and he's a philosophy professor.
Okay.
And I remember him saying, scientific materialism is an impoverished system.
Uh-huh.
And for some reason, that way of putting it just gave me a lot of freedom. It's like, it's not that it's wrong.
Right.
It may be impoverished in certain ways. Like there's so many parts of life that it doesn't touch.
Right. Right.
So I also jumped into hardcore meditation retreats, which at first were very helpful. And then I would now talk about it from a somatic experiencing perspective. I did not titrate at all.
Uh-huh.
I jumped in full force. I did not take my time. And so I had an experience on a retreat that I sometimes call spiritual emergency.
Yeah.
Where I started feeling like very dissociated and kind of disembodied. And there weren't, I think this is something I've run into a lot that seems to be changing lately, and I hope it's changing. There was not support for people going through these things on that kind of retreat.
Yeah. What just out of curiosity, was this a Tibetan Vipassana, TM, Zen? Would you remember the style?
It was insight meditation.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And, and basically I was told to like keep sitting with it.
Yeah.
Which I think works for a percentage of people, and just really doesn't work for another percentage of people.
Can we bookmark this topic as a thread for later in this conversation? Because the question I want to ask you a little bit later is if this situation shows up in your practice today, because it does in mine. And so, okay, bookmark.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a great topic. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
Yeah. So. Yeah. And that experience also sort of catapulted the rest of my journey. So it's a seed in a lot of different ways.
Got it.
Because
so big experience, spiritual emergency, pretty maybe overwhelming, or at least disorienting at a minimum. not a lot of guidance or support, sort of just keep sitting. And it sounds like that wasn't like what didn't solve the issue for you, but then it also sounds like whatever happened there led you down the road. Where did that lead you?
Yeah, well, it opened up a whole new box of questions. You know, I was already sort of asking these questions, and then I had to ask them at a deeper level, like, how am I going to understand my mind, and how am I going to work with it, and what have people done in the past, because the people I'm asking don't seem to have answers.
Okay.
So that sort of led me to Naropa, because okay, this is a place where I could touch in on a lot of different traditions.
Yeah.
And people are talking about these questions. I went to visit the campus, and it was like everyone's talking about the nature of mind and the nature of reality from various points of view and from interreligious dialogue points of view. So, and that ended up being my master's thesis topic, was spiritual emergency.
Ah, okay. All right.
And that's a term from Stan Groff.
Right.
So,
yeah. Can you paint just a little bit for our audience? You know, Naropa is such an institution, such a Boulder institution. You know, can you just paint a little bit of a picture about Naropa, its origins, and just some of I don't know. I guess you're already referencing kind of what its themes are, but can you just paint a little bit of a picture about Naropa as a university?
Sure. Yeah. So there's a Tibetan teacher, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, who escaped from Tibet. When would that have been? I guess his first summer at Naropa was 1973, but before that he was in England for a while, in Oxford, and he ended up coming to Boulder and wanting to start this contemplative institute where people could study arts and psychology and spiritual care from the Tibetan Buddhist perspective.
Right.
He ended up collaborating with a lot of beat poets.
Yeah.
So Kerouac was there, and Allen Ginsberg was there, and then other spiritual teachers started coming. Ram Dass was there.
Yeah.
And it was a hub for this sort of new form of spirituality in the U.S. And
can I interject? I just read, just very brief, and maybe we'll come back to Chogyam Trungpa, because to me he's such a interesting, cool, outside of my own tradition, but somebody like, man, I've been so interested in. Also, my main bodywork teacher, Everett, was a Naropa grad, was a Trungpa student first, and then later he was in the Zen tradition, which is how I knew him. So anyways, I've kind of like heard some. I'm like a collector of anecdotes about Trungpa, because he's just, man, what an interesting guy. But I got a new one just the other day through my Instagram feed or something like that, which was a writing from Joni Mitchell. Have you read that story? That she only saw him a few times, but that and she was addicted to coke, and he asked her some question, and out of defiance, she just like pulled out a bag of coke and did a line in front of him, and then he went into some sort of he did some breathing practice and kind of went into a meditative state, and then it just like after that, she like never used coke again. She also had this sort of essentially a transcendental experience for the next 3 days, and then it was a huge shift for her. But anyway, that was a recent anecdote. But anyway, thinking of all these cultural influences, Ram Dass, the Beats, Joni Mitchell, Trungpa inspired, had a touch on a lot of that generation.
Have you heard her song about him?
No, I think that was referenced, but I don't know what's the name of it.
Yeah, it's something like Starry-Eyed Mystic.
Okay.
That's a great song. Yeah, that's a great song. There's so many stories.
We'll put that in we'll do a little musical interlude in this. We'll play a snippet of that. I've never done that before, so okay, cool, new thing. Great. Yeah.
And a lot of people know Emma Sartwell.
Sure.
And she was a student of Chogyam Trungpa.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So that was a good little, so that was kind of, so he founded that. This was his sort of Milo. And then, you know, you came probably what, a decade ago or more, or what was the era that you were?
Yeah, I started in 2011.
Okay.
I think 88.
Okay.
So been there for a while, but a lot of my teachers were students of his.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, there are a lot of departments. For a while I thought about doing them. The writing department is ironically called the Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics.
Really? Seriously? Wow, I had no idea. That's fantastic. Okay.
But yeah, I ended up in the religious studies track.
Okay.
And yeah, really interested in Buddhism, but also dabbling, like mystical Christianity, mystical Judaism, Hinduism. I was studying Sanskrit for a while. And I think diving deeper into those teachings made me want to work with people more directly, because I was still on this academic track, even though the focus had shifted.
Yep.
So that's when I switched to the divinity program.
I see.
It was like more applied religious studies.
I see. Okay. Yep.
And also there, I met a couple of really progressive Jewish teachers who were integrating mindfulness and other traditions into Jewish teachings.
Okay.
Had a big impact on me and still does on my work.
Sure.
Helped me reconcile my roots with like what felt true to me.
Nice. Yeah.
Yes, from there, I did an internship as a hospital chaplain as part of my divinity program.
Yep. Is that's the CPE or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you need 4 units to be like board certified, and this summer, at the hospital was my first unit. Got it. Okay. And it was a wild ride. Like the model for CPE, I think this is also changing, but the old model was like throw you in the deep end. Like, okay, someone's dying in room 541. Like, bye.
Yeah. Go do something. Be useful. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Suddenly I had to like dredge up anything I had learned along the way. It was fascinating. Yeah. But I think that experience is really what made me feel like something's missing, and it ended up being the somatic nervous system piece. Got it. Okay. I felt like I could meet people emotionally and spiritually, right, and give them some tools or some framing. But as soon as their nervous system started getting wonky, which was all the time if you're in the hospital, right, I didn't have the tools to contain people. Right. Or to even understand, like, how do I really put language to why this person is shutting down, or why this person is clenching their fists and not available. Well, I really like that framing, the framing that you just gave, which is that you knew how to, you had instincts and training around connecting at an emotional or spiritual level. But if the nervous system was dysregulated or wonky, then it's like they weren't available for, like, you couldn't do that thing. Which is sort of the way I'm hearing you share it. Yeah. Okay. And, for some people, I could sort of bypass that. Yeah. Like, they could regulate their nervous system through a spiritual practice, especially if they already had one. Mm-hmm. Prayer or meditation or whatever. Yep. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Connecting with a higher power. Yep. Connecting with their family. But a lot of people who, especially if they hadn't cultivated a practice, but all of a sudden really needed something. Yeah. It was hard for anything to touch the dysregulation, the wonkiness.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. And so you were observing that as a situation. Did you know that there was nervous system modalities? How did you knew what tools to reach for, or how did that? It sounds like that was what guided you towards somatic work. How did you know about it?
Yeah, that's a good question. It took me a few years to kind of find it. I'm one of these like perpetual student types, which you might feel this way too.
Mm-hmm.
So I was always kind of like investigating what else is out there. And in the meantime, I had some marketing jobs. I was marketing for Shambhala Publications and then for an Ayurvedic company. And on the side, like doing my investigations. And when I hit on somatic experiencing, which I think being in Boulder makes it pretty easy to, these things are accessible.
Because Peter Levine was probably based. I mean, he was based in Boulder until somewhat recently, and somatic experiencing is sort of headquartered in Boulder. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And as soon as I sort of heard the framework of somatic experiencing, it was like a puzzle piece clicked into place. And I don't think it's exclusively somatic experiencing, but the nervous system framework.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, this is what was missing. This is what was making me feel unsafe or less than fully competent in those situations.
Got it.
And then as soon as I integrated that piece with the spiritual care, then I felt like, okay, now I feel safe to see my own clients. Like I can hold them in a way that feels like I have enough integrity.
Great. Yeah. Cool. So I mean, I sort of have multiple threads of curiosity, but one curious. So it's sort of like, you wrapped up at some point your MDiv. You did the, you had part of it was doing the Unitas CPE. You encountered, you recognized the need for nervous system work to so that you could actually serve clients in the way that you felt right for you. You had a job, you were doing marketing. What led you towards client work? Like, was that coincide with the founding of somatic spiritual counseling, or what was it what was your kind of clarity around beginning work with others, and in what setting and things like that?
Yeah. Well, another thing that became clear to me working in the hospital was I would see people usually once, maybe 2 or 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like I was really longing to see people consistently over time and build a relationship with people.
Yeah.
And I also felt like it was hard for me to show up as a spiritual figure. And started thinking like, how can I provide this kind of care? Like I love sitting with people in the difficulties, and I also loved like the emotional parts, the family system parts, the like interpersonal dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as someone asked me to pray for them, I was like,
Yep.
it's not coming. So I started thinking, and people would say like, did you want me to start the prayer?
Right, because there's all these expectations, right, around what a chaplain might do. Yeah. I get it. Yeah.
So my wheels started turning like, how can I provide this kind of care in a more consistent way, a more secular way, but I don't have the psychology background.
Yeah. And
I like having the more spiritual emphasis. So I was thinking about like, well, can I apply the standard psychotherapy model to more of what I do?
Yeah.
And particularly SE also teaches to work that way. Right. So it felt natural. And I had been seeing clients like just here and there ever since I studied shamanism and Reiki.
Sure.
And then the last piece, I'm in a group that's sort of like a Jewish mystery school sometimes, how the teacher calls it. And
what was the last thing you said? The teacher's name? Is that you said?
Oh, I said sometimes the teacher calls it a Jewish mystery school.
Oh,
but
sure. Yeah.
It's Zvi is Shalom. And he was a teacher at Naropa.
Yep.
And a diamond approach person and a rabbi. So that's a blend.
Yep.
Did a little bit of training with some of the students around like how to work with other students one-on-one.
Yeah. And
that felt really powerful. Like, especially at first, I was like, I'm really not very good at this, but it feels so good. Like, it feels so there's something here.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good sign. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I just kind of slowly built up seeing clients and feeling into whether it was right for me or not. And then it was feeling good. It was feeling like satisfying and like I was being of service. And once I set a number for myself, like once I'm consistently at 8 clients or something, then I'm going to put all my eggs in this basket and see if I can make a business that runs. And now it's been almost 4 years.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. Very cool. Yeah. Can I, so I'm going to reflect for myself for a moment. It's just some ways can I share a way I relate to what I heard? That'd be okay.
Great.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that piece about like, you had this sort of, religious studies background. And then didn't you ordain in some fashion as well?
Yeah, I went through a Buddhist ordination process, but it was for people who identified as Buddhist, not necessarily exclusively. Like,
yeah,
I say I'm a Buju.
Yeah.
And it was for people who had the Buddhist background, but it was really about democratizing the field of chaplaincy. Chaplaincy started as a Christian institution, and so there's a lot of framework within there around what positions you can get when do you get different pay grades, and it's all based on the Christian model.
Okay. Huh.
Which is very different. Like, being ordained in Judaism or in Buddhism works pretty differently.
Sure.
And there's not necessarily the same roles.
Yeah.
So it was, especially when I was starting, like someone in the class above me at Naropa was the first Buddhist military chaplain.
Okay.
So there was a lot of talk around like, how do we get into this institution? Like,
right.
How integrate into this and make it work
right
with a totally different model.
Right.
So the ordination helped me like have more doors open for me in chaplaincy. But I also took refuge vows and bodhisattva vows, and I feel committed.
Yeah. Well, right. Well, so that was kind of the comparison I was noting for myself is like, similarly, so I did a 3-year monastic training, at a Zen temple, that's sort of the traditional prerequisite for ordination. And so I did that. And like my identity as a priest is like really strong to me at a personal level, but it was sort of like, it was not really the professional role that felt right. Like, I mean, it's not something that I hide, but, but this idea of like, okay, well, are you praying for me? Are you doing are you doing a blessing? Like, what's, are you telling me what's right and wrong? Was not what was sort of like organic for my own way of being service, at least from like a livelihood perspective. And so, for me, it was first body work and then later somatic experiencing and whatnot. But then, for me, that is still my interest is sort of the same. It's like, my interest in body work and somatics and all of that arose out of an interest in studying the self through a meditative lens. That's definitely what inspired all of the work that I do and the work that I do. But yeah, I much rather be in that in the therapeutic relationship of support, of listening, of providing a space, of being able to hold multiple perspectives, not adjudicating what's right and what's wrong, but just creating a container. And so I guess I feel like I'm hearing some resonance in how you kind of had to navigate those identities for yourself.
Yeah, it's tricky because they're overlapping.
Right.
They're overlapping roles.
Right.
Like being even a traditional therapist gets some of that. Like I've heard people say therapists are the priests of our culture.
Of this day and age, right?
Yeah, and you get those projections and those expectations. But there is something different. I don't know how you would describe it around like being that person who's sort of the moral authority or even the ritual authority, like leading funerals or weddings.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you have a sense of like what
that difference is?
Which is?
I mean, I think a lot of it does come. I mean, this isn't to. I mean, there's people who are in those roles who are doing it in a transformative way. So it's not that those roles are a problem, but I think that idea of kind of projecting, or that term moral authority, I think is a good one, because I guess what it comes down to for me, if somebody is looking to me for an answer, as though I can say do this or do that, or this is okay, I'm going to listen to your situation and then I'm going to sort of explain it to you from my perspective. There's people who do that, and probably very valuably. So it's not like that never works, but I think that I don't know, I guess in my own body, I don't like that feeling of that the energy is on me to solve their problem. It's more like, no, okay, I'm very much listening to what's going on for you. I'm really hearing it. I'm feeling it in my body. I hear and what's a way that you might step through this with my assistance, maybe with some guidance, but can I create first a space and then maybe a framework, through tools like somatic experiencing, or, the kinds of questions, but that just feels so much more, I don't know. I just like that use of myself a lot more. And then seeing that, and then partly because of that, like I feel just as good about my work with atheists and people who are, shamanistically oriented. I feel just as good about my work with almost any religious identification, but I don't think that'd be the same if everything was sort of overtly, if everything was put through an overtly Buddhist perspective, because of my own background. So I think those are the reasons why, for me, it works this way. Makes
sense. Yeah, I feel like I've seen people who are such great educators and great, I almost want to say performers, like charismatic people, and who can inspire others in this almost like parental way.
Sure.
But it's such a particular role, and you have to have a certain personality to enjoy it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, like this guy had this guy had that personality. Yeah. Well, I wonder, could you share a little bit more about this sort of like emerging role of, you've used the term interfaith chaplaincy, Buddhist chaplaincy, because that's your, that's part of your tradition, not all of it. But in how, the first Buddhist chaplain in the military, and just to share, like my own dad, who's a Buddhist teacher in Wisconsin, and he got really interested in chaplaincy. He didn't do board certification, but he did 1 unit of CP. This about 10 years ago, or maybe a little more. Really impacted him, but then he was allowed to serve. He was a working chaplain for a number of years, and for him was a very powerful sort of use of his training. And he was in a Catholic organization, right? So here he is as a Buddhist. So I've sort of heard a little bit about that, how these little inroads. And then the only famous Buddhist chaplain I know is that woman in New Mexico. What is her name?
She has a chaplaincy training program.
Yeah, what the heck is her name? We'll think of it.
Right there.
Yeah, no, yeah. Oh. No, so she to me is the only well-known, or yeah, I guess famous is the right word. I'm sure there's lots of others, but like what's your, but you graduated, I'm sure you've got colleagues. What's your read on the role of interfaith or Buddhist chaplaincy in hospital systems, or in just the traditional roles where chaplaincy takes place?
Yeah, it's a great question. I feel like we're at such an interesting moment in the larger picture of religion in our culture.
Joan Halifax. Okay.
Oh, thank you,
all
Joan.
Right. Okay, yeah. Got it.
Good
all right, yeah, keep going.
You win the game today. Yeah, there's so much talk around like the people who identify as spiritual but not religious, or people who identify as the nuns. Like, we will talk about the rise of the nuns, which means people who check nun on the "what religion are you" question.
Ah, that's hilarious. Hadn't heard that. I like it. Yeah.
NONES.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of interesting work happening with humanist chaplaincy.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of people asking these questions around, like, what does it mean to provide or receive spiritual care if you're not in a traditional institution? So even a lot of Buddhist chaplains are in an environment, some of them are in a Buddhist environment where there's shared language and shared expectations, but a lot of them are completely, they're like translators. Like, how can I share what I know in a way that this person can receive?
Yeah.
And same with interfaith or humanist chaplaincy. And it really, I think it forces individuals and institutions to question, like, so how do we define spirituality now that these institutions are breaking up? We can't fall back on, like, a lot of the patients in the hospital would be like, oh, I was expecting like someone about 40 years older than you and male and like some white hair. And
a collar.
Yeah, it's like, sorry, you got me. But it's becoming more and more common.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're in a really rich time for chaplaincy and spiritual care, and also psychological care.
Yeah. Could you share a little bit more? You told us about how you got led into private practice, and that when you got to a certain point, you were going to kind of go all in and start the business, which you have, and it's going strong. Can you share a little bit more about who are you serving these days? What's the makeup of the kind of work you're doing these days, in terms of, it sounds like a largely spiritual focus, but maybe not exclusively. And then I'm gathering a nervous system, a somatic component, but what's an up to date description of the kind of work you're doing with people?
Yeah. Well, a lot of people who find me are attracted to the title, the combination of somatic and spiritual.
Sure.
So, I get a lot of people who are trying to work through some kind of trauma and they've heard about somatic work, or their CBT therapist recommended somatic work.
Mm.
And not everyone has an interest in spirituality, but a lot of people are meditators, or they're interested in mindfulness, or they have, sometimes the trauma is spiritual or religious.
Right.
And then there's a number of people, like you mentioned, with these spiritual emergency type of experiences.
Right.
Particularly people who have had a big cathartic experience, whether that's on a retreat or with psychedelics, or
Yep.
people who are saying, I got some really valuable lessons from that experience, and so I want to incorporate this in a way that respects spiritual side of life.
Yeah.
But it needs to be like I need to get back in my body.
Totally. Yeah. We had bookmarked that. Let's dive in on that, because that's a big thing in my world too, is supporting that sort of a thing. And you mentioned cathartic experiences could be in a retreat setting. I see that a lot. Yours was in the insight, meditation thing. Was it just yesterday? I can't remember. Just this week sometime, I was just looking at that. Same thing, power, spontaneous movement and things showing up, and then, but not, that's what it was. They were having a lot of spontaneous movement during the meditation practice, and associated, sort of psycho-emotional phenomena. And teachers were like, okay, but like, had a little bit of guidance, but not much, not a lot. So that's a story I've heard, a few dozen times by now. And I follow it. I'm sure you probably know it more than I do, but what is that, that organization, the Dark Night of the Soul Project? Do you know what that is?
Yeah, I'm not super familiar with it, but there's a couple of there's another one called Cheetah House.
Right. I think that might be
Believe-
related to, I think there's this connection between those, but they're basically organizations have developed around because, a percentage of people in meditative environments, have a, kind of an adverse experience that isn't easily resolved, where that then is the catalyst for, they got to deal with that, or sometimes over a long period of time. Another client of mine this week, for them, that catalyst was ayahuasca ceremony 10 years ago. And there took a couple years to sort of heal the really acute aftermath of that, which was depersonalization and derealization and stuff like that. But now they're on a more ongoing journey to how to stay. And like you just shared, it's like, on the one hand, there's some, this person who I'm referring to right now, there is some positive that came out of the experience, but definitely some pieces that needed putting back together in a non-trivial way. Tell me, what have you learned along the way, helping, you had it happen for yourself. Like, what did you learn for you? What are you learning for others?
Yeah, it's so tricky, because sometimes that sort of cathartic experience is exactly what someone needs. But it also, I think we're in a culture that really romanticizes that kind of experience. Like, you have the big breakthrough, and you push through, and you get to the deepest, darkest.
Yeah, you felt everything fell apart, and then you found yourself, and you
did the most extreme sports, or and we're not necessarily a culture that I see valuing like subtlety and going slow, and taking our time. And so I think it can be really seductive to like go too fast, too hard, too soon. And I think especially if you have a trauma history, that can be a pattern that feels familiar. And so I've seen people, myself included, who didn't it's hard to realize that we're replaying something, especially if we're in a wellness space.
Context. Yep.
Like, oh, I'm undoing my trauma.
Right.
Which might be true in some ways, but it might be reenacting the trauma in other ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a term in somatic experiencing, global high intensity activation, which is basically where the nervous system, all branches of the nervous system, maybe you can explain this in a different way. I would say all branches of the nervous system are kind of stuck on.
Yeah.
And it makes people predisposed to going really hard, going really fast, and then crashing.
Yeah.
And I think that I wish there was some screening ahead of time. And sometimes I imagine there is with these cathartic experiences, like retreats.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And it's almost anything can, that's the thing. I mean, yeah, it's a tricky situation because, I guess I'll use the example of TRE. That's one of the modalities that I use, tension trauma releasing exercises. And it sometimes gets a bad reputation within the somatic experiencing world as being too cathartic, being too that the risk of having a too big and too overwhelming of an experience. And I push back against that because the way we teach it now is pretty dang trauma informed. So that kind of that possibility of is rare, except when people are doing it independently and with poor guidance and stuff like that. But it can come up all over the place. Like I've seen, when there's trauma and people, when the sort of the seeds for something being quite destabilizing are there. I mean, I've seen it happen in yoga classes. I've seen it happen on meditation retreats. It's probably happened in dance classes. It's definitely happened in TRE settings. It happens in holotropic breath work, Stanislav Grof's breath work practices. It happens with psychedelic work. It happens with, probably happens with, the kinds of retreats, like say like a landmark retreat where people are, doing, so there's any number of contexts where where a 1%, probably a majority percentage of people either have positive experiences or breakthrough experiences that are relatively easy to integrate. But then there's this percentage where it's like, whoa, that was not digestible. And so I have a lot of empathy for that small percentage, or it's not even that small in some situations. I have a lot of empathy for that percentage where the holotropic breath work was cool for everybody else, but for you now you don't feel grounded anymore, and it's been weeks, right? So to me, that's where the subtlety. Well, it's not only, it is the subtlety for sure of somatic experiencing, and these philosophies, like the phrase we use, like that slower is faster, and we mean that in the most literal possible way. It's like that's not just like a nice thing to say; it's like a true thing. Like being slow is a more efficient way, a faster, more powerful way of adjusting the nervous system in many cases. So some of it is the way of working, but some of it's the knowledge, right? The framework that there is an understanding of what's happening. We have a map of the autonomic nervous system, and so we can recognize when someone's in a state of chronic hyperarousal, or we can recognize when someone is in a freeze, shutdown, immobilization response, and in having that, being able to identify it, name it, and sort of know that there are sort of known ways of coming back towards equilibrium or coming back into a window of tolerance. I think that is the huge strength of somatic experiencing, at least the way I sort of see it. I wonder if that's resonant for you, and I wonder if that's the kind of perspective you're bringing when, or maybe that plus something else when people have had these spiritual emergencies, using the word you used earlier.
Yeah, I think I see it pretty similarly to you. I did start thinking as you were speaking about there's these very obvious cases where people feel depersonalized or derealized, and they know that something's not right.
Right.
there's also such a spectrum
Right.
of more subtle situations. Like
Yeah.
I have a teacher, Kimberly Ann Johnson, who's a somatic experiencing teacher, and she talks about that for decades she thought she was in a spiritual state after yoga and meditation, and then she realized that she was just in the like in a slightly dissociated parasympathetic dorsal state.
Right. Totally.
Yeah. And she was like, oh, I'm not actually here. I'm not actually engaged with my life. And this isn't helping me be effective in the world.
Right.
I'm just a little bit addicted to being
Yeah. A
slightly.
little bit of a spiritual bypass, a little bit of dissociation, addiction. Totally.
And similarly, I think sometimes meditation, if we do tend to be more of a person who freezes or who hangs out in the parasympathetic,
Mhm.
a lot of types of meditation can just reinforce that and
Sure.
can make us less able to engage when we need to, or activate when we need to, or fight back when we need to,
Yeah.
or even
Mobilize. Yeah.
mobilize. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it can sort of train us to be less aware of our own impulses or preferences or even sensations if we're just like coming back to one thing over and over and ignoring.
Mhm.
And that can feel very comfortable if that's sort of like our coping mechanisms.
Mhm.
So there can be these very fine hair situations of like, is this a helpful spiritual path? Is this a spiritual bypass relying on my old patterns? Is it some of both?
Totally. No, it's really wise to identify that. Yeah, of course, there's the really obvious spiritual emergencies where they need some kind of additional support. But you're absolutely correct that there's these, other contexts. Yeah, I like that. I like that framing of things because it's that too has come up for me a lot. And where the question that the person might be coming in with isn't like, help, I'm broken, but it's okay, well, I've done a lot of this and I love it. My sitting practice is my rock. And like, why is it so hard for me to like be in relationship with other human beings? Or, I meditate like crazy, or I do yoga like crazy, but like, man, I really struggle with anxiety. So it's sort of like where there's a recognition where a given practice and embodiment practice is having a lot of value, but there's like it's not covering everything. And yeah, and so I think you're right that's another zone where some nervous system work can really round out somebody's understanding of themselves, connection to body felt sense. I love the phrases you used. What are my preference? Can I fight back when necessary? Is my relational capacity? Can I be in connection with others and stay in connection with myself? To what degree can I embody that? Those are really useful questions to be asking.
And I think especially we were talking about the benefits of this interreligious, interspiritual context that we live in. Most of us in this culture, in our demographic, live in that kind of world.
Yeah.
There's a lot of beauty there and a lot to explore and to cross-pollinate. But I think it leaves more space and more possibility for running into these dead ends, or these like spiritual cul-de-sacs.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, I was sort of like putting together my own meditation practice, and something's not working, like something's tweaking.
Mm-hmm. 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 Totally. Yeah. I mean, and then what I was going to ask you is, I guess, on this theme of spiritual emergency or cathartic experiences, like, I was kind of like, what have you learned? What have I learned working that? One thing that I come back to now is, or a way that I think I can be of service, and I'm guessing this is true for you too, is I now lean a lot into that. Hey, let's lay a foundation. Okay, so you've done this thing, or you want to do this thing, whether that's psychedelics or a meditation retreat or something that's going to be, maybe a big experience for you. Hey, let's do some skill building here. Like let's and I really like that, because I really like it when people that I've worked with now go into experiences with more self-awareness around monitoring their nervous system, knowing what are the things that might, create regulation in real time, whether that's orienting, whether it's connecting to body sense, whether it's giving more permission around freedom in their movements or their breaths, or just little things that they have learned help them stay kind of present and well regulated. So I'm really enjoying doing like sort of like prep work was sort of like an area that I enjoy, but I wonder if that comes up for you.
Yeah, I love that way of thinking about it. And I think it makes so much sense, because that's sort of the opposite of diving into the deep end.
Right,
it's like,
right.
how can we walk down the stairs?
Yeah.
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 Maybe you just named them, but I'm curious, like, what you think are the most important skills for those kind of experiences.
Well, I think I mean, the skills I mentioned were like self-regulate, things like, yeah, body sensation. Can I feel, how am I supported on the chair, the ground? Permission of movement. Yeah. Like my whole, when I'm with any new client, I have this whole little spiel around, like, when we do somatic work, we want to like throw all the rules out the window about like, you should sit a certain way and we need to make eye contact. And, if you're going to yawn, maybe you got to suppress that, because, the person's going to think you're tired or bored or something. So I kind of have this whole philosophy early on. It's like my first kind of like lesson or ground rules is that, like, in this setting, man, like, you might want to slouch, you might want to sit ramrod straight, you might be fidgety, you might take 10 big breaths in a row, your eyes might want to close, and that there's like this okayness with all of that. So like that's one thing I think is sort of like this sort of like that you can listen to your somatic impulses, and unless there's some reason not to, you can follow them. They're allowed. All these things are fine. In most settings, they're more fine than we realize, and if we let them be there, we're more comfortable. And so that's sort of like one thing. But conceptually, there's one that I really resonate with. The conceptual one is, I'm just a big believer in this. I really do a lot of teaching around the concept of agency, and that agency is this ability, this felt sense of choice, of I'm choosing this or I'm choosing that. And so much of childhood is without agency, so much of trauma is without agency, so much of acculturation limits agency. And so like that's just one theme that um I think a lot of people can do a little bit of work around, can start to recognize when how good it feels when they can do those little check-ins, like, as is this, am I in a state of agency right now? Am I in a, is it sort of like consent, right? Am I in a state of saying yes? Do I have am I in a state where I could say no? Am I in a state where I can ask for what I need? Am I in a state where I can say, this isn't working for me, what needs to change? Am I in that state? So I think that's like a theme I like to bring in, because I think if you carry a sense of agency with you, I mean, certain things, yeah, if you're going to have a big transcendent experience, it might involve letting go and surrender. So I'm all for that. There's some spiritual emergencies or psychedelic emergencies. Surrender is going to be a piece of it. So it's not about, my definition of agency isn't about ego control. But
And
it's,
hopefully you're choosing to surrender.
Right. Absolutely. Exactly. Right. Is this what I want to do right now or not? Because, and coming back to this thing about TRE and whether it's too much, what a common instruction I give, because TRE, I really, to me, rarely is it a abreactive experience. It might, there's processing, sure. But what I always say to clients is listen, uh, I care about today's session. I hope it's a good one. I hope some really cool. I hope it's a good one. But more than I care about what happens today, I care about the next few months. I care about, and so what that means is that the person stays within a zone of choice around. Okay, well, what am I going to work with today, and where am I on my edge? And this feels really good that I'm getting in touch with this grief. I'm going to be with this right now. Or, ooh, wow, I feel that. And I'm curious about it, but you know what? I do not have what it takes to go forward with that right now. So I'm gonna step away. I'm gonna integrate. I'm gonna self-regulate, and I'm gonna sort of live to go another day. And there'll be another time when I can approach that again. And so that's my own attitude. Is around this topic of agency. Is sometimes it is the moment to go for something. But yeah, make sure that's your choice on your terms, and that that's not being forced, and that the conditions might be right on this occasion, and what maybe is called for is to call it and come at it again on a future time. So I guess that's a bit of my thoughts around it.
Yeah, I love the skill building that you're talking about, because it also makes me realize it puts into a larger context, I think, what we're talking about, where to me, these are all skills for, there's so many times when we choose to have a disruptive experience, like whether that's doing a medical procedure or having a wedding or going to therapy. Like, we know something's going to be disrupted and we're choosing to go into it.
Right,
or
right.
a psychedelic experience, and we might not know how disruptive it's going to be,
Right.
but it's the same skills. It's the same tools we want to have in our tool bag going into any potentially disruptive experience. I think the goal of life is to have as little disruption as possible, but hopefully we get to know ourselves and get to know like what kind of disruption is helpful and what kind is destructive,
right.
And how much capacity do we have at any given moment to hold how much disruption.
Right. Totally. No, I love that. My thoughts went back to Trungpa as, a big catalyst. And my guess, and maybe we don't need to go into the, I like to think of, I like to appreciate what I appreciate about, but of course he has a controversial history. And so, and there's, there's the people that would say that, that the level of disruption may have worked beautifully for Joni Mitchell, but perhaps not for everybody. So, I can hold that perspective. But I wanted to circle, if this isn't too abrupt of a change of subject, I wanted to ask a little bit about this book. Can we shift to that? So for the audience here, so Emma was one of the editors for this book. What year was this published?
Ooh, just a couple of years ago.
Yeah, recently. Yeah, we could look up. Anyway, it's Cynicism and Magic, Intelligence and Intuition on the Buddhist Path, Chogyam Trungpa, which published for sure posthumously, because this was a couple years ago and he died in the mid 80s. So can you share just a little bit about this project, these writings, what and your role? And I'd love to hear a little bit about it.
Yeah, that was such a fun project. There's Trungpa has so many hours of lectures.
Like recorded or written or?
Recorded.
Okay.
He gave a lot of talks.
Okay.
I wish I could remember the numbers at the moment, but it's a small-ish percentage have actually been written down, transcribed.
I see.
And then a smaller percentage have been published.
Okay.
So there's a number of people who are working on his teachings and trying to get them into publishable form.
I see.
And two of the main editors are Carolyn Gimian and Judy Leaf. And Judy Leaf was president of Naropa for a while. I think she was the first president, and now her husband, there's been other presidents, but her husband is the president currently.
Okay.
And they are thinking of retiring or phasing out how much editing they're doing. So they wanted to start training a next generation of editors.
Okay.
There were about 10 of us who got together and chose a seminar, which happened to be his first seminar in Naropa.
Yep.
And just did the transcribing, had arguments about M dashes and semicolons. And it is a translation project to turn something from spoken words
to written.
I didn't realize how much of a translation that was going to be.
Got it.
And maybe especially with someone who's English as a second language.
Sure.
But it was such a different way for me to be immersed in these teachings. Like I get so granular, like which word. And sometimes you couldn't really tell which words he's using. So it's like, what is exactly the meaning he's trying to get across?
Right.
That responsibility of like, I hope I'm getting it right. Like, I hope I'm saying what he wanted to say.
Right. Yeah.
But it felt so intimate.
Ah, interesting. Well, that's very cool. Well, then that makes me, so if you were part of this cohort being trained to carry on what's going to be this ongoing work of bringing more of his lectures into writing, what I'm hoping you're saying is that or what I'm wondering, like, are you going to do more of this? Are you going to continue with this, do you think?
I hope so. The past couple of years have been a lot of focusing on my own business and moving around physically. Yeah. But that's definitely a goal of mine, is to do more of this work and reconnect with. I don't think that original cohort is planning. We did this as like a series of retreats over 3 years. And I don't think anything is planned with that group, but I'm hoping to. There's been whispers between people of like
next projects.
Yeah.
Is it Shambhala that Shambhala publishes? Yeah. Cool. Is there any in terms of this actual seminar that he gave, were there any themes or anything that's sort of like, oh yeah, this is a little slice of that seminar series that, really spoke to me, or I don't know, is there any little nugget in there that you want to share?
It's so rich. He has a section about like sort of what we were talking about preparing the spiritual path, and he uses the metaphor of like getting on a plane, and he's like, listen to the instructions, like put your seat back up, tray table in its right position, put your cigarette out. There's a lot of cigarettes in his
examples. Yeah.
And like, how do we get ready for this plane to take off? Like, what's
is his point that those preparatory steps are necessary, or that they're a part of this journey, or what's his point with that?
Yeah, I think the point is it actually has a lot to do with the title, Cynicism and Magic. A lot of what he's talking about is like, which I think really resonates with what we've been talking about. It's like, how do we balance, how do we have magic in our lives and open doors without losing our cynicism, which in this case, what I took from how he means it is like keeping our feet on the ground. How do we stay embodied? How do we stay safe? How do we do the prep work, but still open to the unseen, to the transformative?
Mm.
And it's so easy to fall too far into one side or the other. Like, you dismiss everything that's unseen and cling to your cynicism.
Right.
And then, or to throw yourself into magical spiritual experiences,
Right.
but ignoring all of your pain, all of everyone else's pain. You've left the earth without putting your seatbelt on.
Right. Ah, I like that. Okay. Yeah. I like that. Yeah, no, I feel that theme, with yours and my descriptions of our origin story, you can feel how much those two dimensions played a part.
Yeah. He's an interesting figure. There's been, and then his son, the son, there's been a lot of controversy around him, international.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and it's I'm not sure exactly like where I would put myself in that conversation. I've gotten so much personally out of his teachings, but I never met him. I was never in those circles.
Yeah.
So, but it seems like there's more and more consciousness around things like power dynamics and teacher-student relationships. And I hope that the conversations can be had.
Constructive.
And that it doesn't mean that the teachings are thrown out.
Right.
Or that the teachings are clung to at any cost either.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's a really healthy framing. Really matches. My first, I didn't know anything about him, and I think I pulled a book off the shelf. I think my dad's bookshelf, and it was Crazy Wisdom, and I think later I read Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, but Crazy Wisdom just I always like circle back to. There, like, to me, there's just something so. I feel it in all of his writings. It's just insanely lucid quality to his storytelling, and it's like the most just. It makes things sound so clear and common sense is the wrong word, but like that's the feeling I have. Even though he might be using words all this stuff about the life of Padmasambhava, who I don't know who the heck this, like, zero connection culturally, historically, yet somehow I'm like feeling something. So yeah, I mean, I've been very influenced by his writings.
It's pretty amazing how he was able to come from a traditional culture in Tibet and just land in the Western 70s, and the way that he got it, and was able to speak to people meet them where they were. Pretty amazing. Like, I can't imagine the opposite, like going into Tibetan culture and speaking in a way that Tibetans would understand.
Totally. No, I completely agree. No, really, really unique, amazing ability to do that. Yeah. Wow. I feel nourished and rich with this, and energized by our conversation today. Big appreciation for doing it. Is there anything you feel like we haven't, anything we missed, or that we need to include, do you think?
I don't know. I just love how organic our conversation was, and how it ended up touching on so many themes that feel so important to me personally and professionally. And there seemed to be a kind of magic about how like each topic in a way contained a lot of the same dualities or the same explorations. So I'm sure something will come to me after this that I wish I had.
Now, who knows? So, hey, if it paves the way for a part 2, that wouldn't be bad. I'm actually going to interview, after I set this up with you. I have a dear friend in Wisconsin, Anne Marie Kelson, who's also she did an MDiv at University of Chicago, and is working full time as a chaplain, and she with a Zen background in a different Zen school, the Rochester Zen Center. And after you and I booked this, and I was a little bit on this theme, I was like, okay, well, this theme of, what's the work of a chaplain, and maybe I'll include my dad at some point too. And he wrote an interesting book about his time, coming into chaplaincy work as a, as first as a longtime Zen practitioner and teacher. But so anyway, but it's a theme in the podcast that I'm hoping to continue. And so if there's things that we want to cover next, let's do it. Let's do it together.
I love that.
Yeah.
Tell me quickly, what context do they work in, your dad and your friend?
Well, so Anne Marie works at an organization called A Grace, which is a nonprofit hospice. She works in hospice care full time. And my dad is retired from it, but he was doing part-time chaplaincy, some of it volunteer, some of it was maybe paid. I'm not really sure, but for him, it was really just like it was a study, and it was like he just wanted to say, can I apply my Zen practice for, he does as a teacher. Can I, what happens when I'm with people who are dying and they're like what you shared earlier, and his book is name of it is Facing Suffering, and what he talks about, he doesn't, unlike me, he didn't study somatic experience and all this and that, but our Zen tradition in general is very focused on the body, and so a big theme of his book is talking about sort of the physicality of being with suffering, and one major theme is sort of like, okay, well, what's the posture, that his view is so much of the work of supporting, of connecting, that he thinks of it as work in this very literal sense, almost like a manual labor sense, but that there's this physical component to that, which is a perspective I really appreciate. But anyway, yeah. So these are the other sort of themes
with threads, and I like covering a range of like, where do people need spiritual care? Right. Points.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, let's call it a wrap for right now, and do it again.
Thank you so much, Alex.
Yeah, thank you, Emma. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Red Beard Embodiment Podcast. To learn more, visit us at redbeardsomatictherapy.com or send me an email at alex@redbeardsomatictherapy.com. If today's conversation resonated with you, help spread the word by subscribing and sharing with others. Hope to see you next time.